Yeah, I think we can start now.
Yes. Yes, Madhura, we can get started. So we are having a panel discussion on online proceedings, do's and don'ts. This initiative, we started almost a year back. Around this time, ILA and KelpHR came together and said that we need to do something on this subject. The subject is little complicated, Posh. When it came, I remember in 2013, of course, we were working prior to that from Vishaka guidelines perspective, but a very detailed law came around this time, and we were wondering, there were many aspects to it. So why not break it down? Why not simplify it? So who better than a group of lawyers coming together? And today, if you see, I have a power-packed team here. So Madhura, I'm going to hand it over to you to share about
Yes. Yes, Smita. Thank you so much. So, hello everyone. Myself Madhura. I represent Indian Lawyers Association (ILA). That is a national level organization working to create a common voice of all the legal professionals across the country. We do this by way of having local chapters, and as of now, we have about 75 chapters in different cities who create different events, webinars, seminars, trainings for lawyers and law students. We also run several initiatives for mentorship and guidance and offer legal aid to the community who need it the most. So I'll be very happy to send all of you a detailed email tomorrow. And we hope to see all of you joining more and more ILA events as well as come forward to be a part of our initiatives. I'll hand it over to Smita. Thank you, Smita.
Thank you, Madhura, for that introduction. And KelpHR, at KelpHR, we started this organization in the year 2013, the same year we got the formal law. We are constantly working to ensure that we simplify this law, okay, so that common people, organizations, corporates understand their roles and responsibilities and work in creating safe, inclusive and happy workplaces, right? So that's our vision you can see online. About me, I have around 23 years of work experience. I am a thorough HR professional, been an entrepreneur from last 8 years, enjoying my journey. I was listed as the diversity consultant in Global Diversity List 2020. Very happy and very proud to be hosting this discussion today, because if you see this panel members, absolutely power packed panel members, many of y'all must have worked with them, and I cannot explain how excited I am to introduce them to you. So I have with me Rama Sarore. She's the director of MGZ EduTech Private Limited. She's an advocate trainer at Posh, family law, POCSO, she's an NLP trainer. She's been a coach for 20 plus years of total experience in human rights, especially women and child rights, right? Working as an external member with 15 plus organizations on Posh. She's also been local committee member for Pune. Okay, she's an INLPTA certified trainer on neuro-linguistic programming, and she's written various articles and also been an SME on various TV shows. So welcome, Rama. I also have my next panel member, Dr. Devika Singh. She's a registered practitioner with the Bar Council of India and on the rolls of solicitors of England and Wales. Advocate Devika Singh is a doctorate holder from VU University, Netherlands, and has a master's in law from King's College London, for which she was awarded a full scholarship by the DFID UK. Now, she's a co-founder at Cohere Consultants, a boutique practice covering all legal compliances and gender-related aspects. She's a country head and a practice head and an SME in the subject that we are going to be discussing today. She also is a founder of Cohere Communities NGO and acts as and she's conducted. The most striking feature that I read in her resume when I was going through was that she has handled 2,000 inquiries. I was like, wow, 2,000 inquiries, you can write like 200 books. Okay, so tell me if you need help to do that, right? The youngest panel member here, and I'm so excited to be introducing her because I really see myself, Roshni. She is a lawyer graduate from the School of Law, Christ University in 2019, and went on to do her master's from Singapore Management University, focusing on cross-border business and finance laws. She is currently an associate with IC Universal Legal Bangalore office in the corporate team. She has attended several POSH virtual training programs and has written various articles on the selected topics. The most exciting part why I thought was most exciting for me in her profile was she's a 100-meter sprinter and passionate about playing piano. And the thing that she stayed with me is that I will never let it go off till my feet and fingers allow. Okay, so she's going to be doing that throughout. So welcome on board, all three of you. Any quick hello messages to the audiences here?
Hi, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. It's really great that we are using our online platforms to learn more about online things. Okay, I'm in August company. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Smita, and everybody present here. Thank you, Smita, specifically for that introduction.
Awesome. I'll tell you what happened to me, okay? When Prime Minister Modi on 21st of March announced lockdown, the first thing I said, thank you, God, was that, okay, at least now sexual harassment complaints will not come, because we were loaded, right? There were so many sexual harassment complaints. We were like in a week handling at least one or two. So I said, okay, at least now everybody will stay at home and we'll not get sexual harassment complaint. I think God did not like my prayer. Immediately next day, I get a call of a sexual harassment complaint, and that did not stop. So the number of harassment complaints that we handled in 2019 has remained. It has not reduced, but has remained same in 2020 and has continued, in fact, increased in 2021. Initially, when the case came up, I said, oh, 21 days, we can't do anything. Let's wait for 21 days. And, after the thing opens up, we'll go and have physical inquiries. And you all know it did not happen, right? So we were forced for a virtual investigations or inquiries. And we had to set it up. We had to think on our feet, what should be done next? So we thought, let's get the Power Pack people to tell us whether Smita did it right or wrong. Or any of you would have any questions, we will be picking their brains today on that. So let's get started. We come to you because, Roshni, because the most important question that has been brimming on people's mind is about the recent Bombay High Court judgment, which is stirring up thought processes. People are thinking, what is it? Something new? This is something out of the box. So what do you think, Roshni, about this whole judgment? And how do you think as an IC member, should I be looking at it?
Okay. All right. Thank you. I will be discussing a summary of the latest Bombay High Court judgment that was passed on 24th September 2021. And this judgment was respect to the guidelines to preserve the anonymity of the parties, both parties of sexual harassment cases at the workplace. And what I wanted to think, like I will get into the guidelines a little after, but what I wanted to say is that the POSH Act is quite progressive. It's not available in many other countries other than India, specifically to women, sexual harassment cases to women at the workplace. There are all the penal codes will deal with the sexual harassment cases, but to workplace, this is a very specific act. But apart from being so progressive in nature, there are still certain practical and operational difficulties, which this recent Bombay High Court judgment has released. And this has basically dealt with the work protocol, the way the investigations take place, the way IC members conduct the hearings, and the manner of providing or producing the recommendation, that is the order. So I will get into the guidelines, and then you will know the name of the Bombay High Court case and why it's called so. And this, before that, this case has hurled up a lot and created a lot of hue and cry, and now you'll know why. Okay, so the following are the key directions that were issued by the Bombay High Court. First is anonymity. the names of the parties involved in the proceedings cannot be mentioned in the order sheets. So as example, a previous judgment, Jahid Ali versus Union of India. We are known to get these case laws or the cause title with the first party's name versus the second party's name. But now, after the specific guidelines, we can only read the case law names, the cause title as A versus B or P versus D. And getting back to the name of this specific judgment, it is called P versus A and others. They haven't even given the names of the complainant and the alleged respondent. So the first thing is anonymity. Second is the body of the order cannot contain any of the personal identifiable information of the parties. That is, for example, their names, their email IDs, their phone numbers, addresses, anything that will identify to the parties cannot be produced in the order. Third, all the orders and judgments need to be delivered in private. That is either in the chambers or in camera. It cannot happen as, it has to be a physical attendance only. It cannot happen online. Fourth, no other than the advocate on record with the valid and recent, that is the latest wakalatnama, will be allowed to take copies of the judgment. Like, for example, if there are people like the public, they cannot come and ask for this copy. We don't know why and what the case is about, what is the hearing, what's the judgment, nothing. Third, no access of decisions. It's similar to the previous one. Orders, judgments, and witness depositions are not permitted to be allowed. The code does not allow this. Number 5, no media disclosure. All concerned parties, advocates, witnesses are made to sign non-disclosures or confidentiality forms because they're not allowed to speak to the press, media, not post anything in Twitter, other social media networks, or even speak to their own family members because they are restricted by these guidelines. And this is only for any IC case which goes on appeal to the Bombay High Court. Now, the 6th one, any failure to ensure any of these strict compliances will amount to contempt of court. So these are the very stringent guidelines by the Bombay High Court in their recent case.
Thank you very much for that, Roshni. Roshni, anything you think as an IC member, or it could be Devika or Rama who could fill in here. As an IC member, do you think any of these impact us?
Shall I go first?
Yes, please, Ash.
So I think if I'm an IC member and these guidelines have come out, I think it's got its advantages and disadvantages, both equally. Advantages being it restricts the anonymity and people won't know the victim, and the victim will not go through any more trauma. You know, the press also have their own trial. None of that will happen. And the disadvantage is that, for example, the respondent, that's the person who's conducted the sexual act, and if the hearing is against that person, his name will not be out in public. Nobody will know, nobody will ever find out that he was thrown out, for example, from his job. If that is the recommendation that he has to leave his job, he was thrown out for this particular act in a previous workplace. So no one will know. Next time he applies to another place, no one will ever find out that he has been thrown out for sexual harassment conduct. So I think that is that's a disadvantage, a big one.
Wow, because that is going to be a disadvantage. Devika, Rama, anything that y'all want to fill in here?
Sure. I just want to take this point that Roshni made a little ahead. The law in itself have enough, kind of mentions about confidentiality that has to be maintained while handling a case of sexual harassment. Having said that, they also have a section that talks about when it is important to publish the name of the respondent who's found guilty of sexual harassment, especially when you want to prevent more sexual harassment from happening, or when there is a possibility that this person has been an offender in many cases. So when the Act specifically has said when it can be published in the media or when it can be made public.
Oh, I think Rama froze.
Rama had mentioned that she may be facing some difficulties. Maybe till she gets in, I'll just fill in with my point of view, Smita.
Yes, please, Devika.
Sure. Okay. So first, of course, I mean, with due respect to this judgment and the fact that it has come from the Bombay High Court, of course, the moment it came out, it created a lot of ripples. And at Coher Consultants, we even had these public-facing debates, okay, where we looked at whether this judgment is good, bad, indifferent, what it is. But at the sum of it, and since I'm in this panel as a lawyer, okay, I'm going to speak from a very legal perspective where this judgment is concerned. This judgment has been passed in civil suit number 142 of 2021. Now, what is important to understand is that when an order is passed in a civil suit, even if some of the allegations are touching on POSH, it is not an order or a proceeding which has been passed under the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act. So actually, it has got nothing to do with the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act. What the judge is attempting to do and what the judgment is attempting to do is regulate their own proceedings. And I'll tell you why. Because this judgment has also not been passed in a writ jurisdiction. Now, when there is a writ jurisdiction, that is something which affects the world at large, okay? Because that goes beyond just the parties in that particular case. In a civil jurisdiction, within the mandate of the Civil Procedure Code, it only impacts the parties in that case. So though I know that there has been a lot of media that has really been created around how this is going to impact IC proceedings, let me tell you, and of course, we are looking at several organizations to seek a clarification. There was in fact a clarification that even came out where the judge there was a follow-up to this particular judgment, and the honorable judge said this is about the parties in this case, as in the parties in the proceedings in civil suit number 142 of 2021. So I just want to make it very clear that yes, court proceedings may get impacted or influenced by this particular judgment, but internal committee proceedings and local committee proceedings need not. You may take the good things out of this judgment, but you need not take the bad.
Yeah, so Devika, just extending the point that Roshni made and then you clarified, the disadvantage for organization, but maybe an advantage for a perpetrator. Okay, it's a simple thing. There, background verification happens when a person is terminated or moves from a particular organization. Now, if that person is being terminated for sexual harassment, the new organization and they call and ask, generally becomes a norm that they share that this person has been terminated for sexual harassment. See if you would want to hire that person. So will that change? Does it now restrict organizations from sharing that part? So that's something which.
So does this judgment change it? No, this judgment does not change anything. But let's look at what the practical trend has been. Okay, see, under section 16 of the Act, all right, the contents of a complaint, the outcomes of a complaint, the recommendations of an IC cannot be published in any manner or made known to the media, the public at large, etc. All right. Termination orders, where they very specifically call out misconduct on account of sexual harassment, may definitely come up in background verifications, as they always did. Okay. Usually termination orders, in fact, don't even say misconduct on account of sexual harassment. They would be saying misconduct, and that is what would come out. Okay, in an anonymized fashion of what would come out. All right. And practically what we've seen is most organizations attempt to do voluntary exits of resources rather than actually even state anything in a termination order. And that will never come out in a background verification. So that's really how the practical stuff was, and it stands and remains distinct.
Hey, Rama, you're back. Thank you. We lost you for a minute. Thank you, Devika, for filling in. Yeah, so I think you were just starting to say something and we lost you. You were mentioning about Bombay High Court. inputs?
Yes, and I think Devika has covered the point that I was trying to make, that the law has specific provisions on confidentiality that has to be maintained. And we all do that while we're doing inquiries of sexual harassment. And it also has a specific provision to talk about when a name of the respondent can be made public in the interest to prevent more cases of sexual harassment. So it is already covered under the law. So this judgment will not impact that, is the point that I was trying to make.
Got it. Thank you. I think that's quite a good summary. So moving to our topic of online proceedings or virtual sexual harassment. People have always asked this, right? Is virtual sexual harassment is really a thing? Considering we are in this environment, do you, Devika, this question is for you, that what do you think about it? Do you think it's really something?
First, Smita, let me respond by saying that I find the phrase virtual sexual harassment to be a real misnomer. You know, the word virtual by itself is a disservice, in my opinion. I mean, traditionally, if you think of virtual, it's understood to mean something that doesn't exist in the real or physical world. You know, as an adjective, it means almost, not exactly. So whenever someone uses the phrase virtual sexual harassment, I feel like they're referring to a phantom, something that's not real. And what we have seen, Smita, what you described in your experience, which is exactly my experience also when the pandemic happened, sexual harassment in online spaces or through online mediums is actually very real. Okay, even preceding the pandemic, we had cases of sexual harassment in online spaces and through online mediums. Okay, I mean, one of the most famous judgments from the Madhya Pradesh High Court, which is about a judge's conduct, all right, of sending inappropriate WhatsApp messages, okay, to his subordinate. There very clearly the Madhya Pradesh High Court had said that, you know, this falls under section 2 and 5, and WhatsApp messages, any sort of messages in the online space, etc., all of them get covered. So this is not something that is new. But yes, what you need to understand is that with the advent of technology as a global phenomena, what was already in place got spurred by the pandemic. Okay, so I would correct the phrase by saying it is workplaces that have become virtual, not sexual harassment. And, you know, so maybe the better way for us to describe it is sexual harassment in the virtual workplace or the virtual space. Okay.
Wow, I like the way you picked up. You're a real lawyer.
Thank you.
I really like the way you explained. And yeah, I mean, till now, I had not paid attention to the word virtual sexual harassment. Great. Thank you for bringing that point up. And, you know, you mentioned one of the case laws. So, Roshni, are there any case studies, case laws, do you think, in the sexual harassment in virtual space exist? I see I've become knowledgeable by listening to y'all folks.
Yeah. So another case law in sexual harassment in the virtual workplace, they do exist. And I will be speaking of one more. It's called the Jahid Ali versus Union of India. It's a 2015 case. And it was held by the Delhi High Court between a superintendent, a superior lady officer, and a junior constable. Both of them, so it's a working relationship between an instructor and a teacher. And in this case, the junior constable started sending a couple of messages to the superintendent, the lady constable, and who was his superior. And those messages turned out to be quite flirtatious, and she felt quite uncomfortable with those messages. So there was one day when she didn't turn up for a particular session or a class, whatever was being conducted. And that was the day he kept sending many messages. And this is when she went and she filed a complaint against, under the act, the POSH Act, against him. And the Delhi High Court stated that he said that he sent those messages because he was just concerned as to why she didn't show up to work. But the Delhi High Court stated that these any sort of messages being sent on an online platform, that is what amounts to sexual harassment virtually, with any sexually colored messages will amount to and will be considered as sexual harassment at the workplace. So as workplace has been defined in the Act under Section 2, subclause O5, it is where any place visited by the employee arising out of during the course of employment, including transportation by the employee for undertaking such transportation. So this means that the employee working from home or a cafe or anywhere else, as long as he is conducting his work, it is considered as a workplace. So wherever the sexual harassment, whether it's online platform or in the physical office, it is still considered as, it still falls under a POSH case. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Roshni, for that input. And sexual harassment in virtual spaces exist, and it is the reality. I think we can easily, the entire year and plus 1.5 years, I have seen shapes and sizes of these harassment happening. There's something completely out of box also happening. And we were thinking, really, I mean, that is what made us realize that if a perpetrator is a perpetrator, they'll remain perpetrator wherever, right? So moving on to the next burning question, and Rama, I come to you. This is one of my clients, okay? IT world has realized that people can work from home, people can, if a Bangalore-based IT firm decides to recruit somebody from Northeast, Jammu, Kerala, they can sit in their homes and work, right? But now the question is, when we form IC, it says that IC has to be of that establishment or that building. Now, how will the IC be formed for such diverse work locations? So any ideas, any thoughts around it?
So usually it will be as per the office that the person is reporting to. So even if the person is sitting in Delhi and is reporting to an office in Bangalore, it will be the Bangalore IC who will handle the case. Having said that, of course, if the respondent is from a different organization, it will be the respondent's IC who will handle the case. And usually we say that a representative from the complainant's IC should be present as an observer to see that the trial is happening fairly. There is another trend that I see that is coming up, especially in organizations that have a pan-India presence. So usually what they do is in some companies that I work as an external member, they have regional committees formed. So there's a committee for North, South, East and West zone, and they nominate people at a senior positions to chair these committees, and they have some people as common people in these committees. And then suppose they are working in, so because the committees also have to be at the district level, because they have to report to the district officer of that district. So they have district office representation in the committee. So if there's somebody from Pune district, the cases come up in Pune district, then they will be the common members of the committee, and there will be one representative from the Pune district office who will be part of that committee. So people are coming up with new ways in which they can form the committee.
Probably I would have joined army. And why I say that is because a lot of people in my family.
And that also is something that can be quite harassing.
It is, but I would say that in one particular organization, what they've done is they've created a POSH secretariat. So they have the senior people from the HR, they have the senior people from the legal team, and one more person entirely looking just into compliance of POSH because of the pan-India presence in so many cases coming up. And I think that helps because the coordination is happening from one point, and they know exactly, who to nominate. I mean, this case will go to which IC, they know that. And so that has helped in the coordination.
Okay. All right. So what you're trying to say is this IT company, it has to ensure even if they recruit people from anywhere, they will have to tag them to specific offices and the IC of that particular region or maybe office will be taking care. So that's a very important point, because I think even if they recruit people from anywhere, they will have to ensure that they tag them to one of the districts, one of the offices. So my next question is something related. So when, as I said in the beginning, right, when the online proceedings started, is it even acceptable? And Devika, I would want you to throw some light on this, that tomorrow, if it gets challenged in court of law, will it stand true? And is it applicable only now, because till the time everything becomes normal, and will this change later on? So what is your view on online proceedings?
Thanks, Smita, for that. So, Smita, what I've done is I've also dropped a link to an article that we wrote very early on when the 21-day lockdown got imposed. Okay, and it was basically on whether there is going to be any impact of this lockdown on proceedings of the IC, and how can you get your proceedings to go online? Is there any bar? So I've actually just dropped a link in case people want to access that. I believe that advice is still very cogent in our situation. I'll tell you, number one, online proceedings have always been acceptable. There is no legal bar. There is no law that says there cannot be online proceedings. In fact, several people may not know this, but the CIC, the Central Information Commission, okay, it regularly uses video conferencing as a way to connect with various officers, etc., that are part of proceedings who cannot come in. So, this is something that's not new, that's not been created by the pandemic. It's something that was there very early on in the pandemic itself. Even the MCA took out a circular that board meetings can happen, through video conferencing. So I don't really see how there is any legal impact, even during the pandemic, when we see all these all the cases that have been done. For example, Bima Pandey, okay, which was one case which came out from the Delhi High Court, and the Delhi High Court was commenting on moral policing by the internal committees. The entire case was conducted through video conferencing. We have seen POCSO cases conducted through video conferencing, all right, criminal cases conducted through video conferencing. So I don't see any reason for us to say that online proceedings are not acceptable. Okay, and even when any court has looked at online inquiries, which have been done by internal committees, they have not received any extra scrutiny or any questioning by the courts. I mean, the Gujarat High Court in Brahma Prakash, okay, very matter-of-factly referred to this fact-finding report by the Internal Complaints Committee, where video conferencing was used, all the committee members were present, and the court did not say in any manner, or neither did it entertain any argument that this is against natural justice or anything like that. So regularly courts have been looking at this, petitioners are being asked to attend on a Zoom platform, etc. And these have now pretty much become case facts. Now, will online hearings continue now that things are opening up? I see no reason why they won't, but I also have several safeguards that I would suggest. Okay. First, what we need to understand with online hearings is that online hearings is limited to a very small percentage, okay, of our workplaces. Fine. Because there are very few workplaces really, when you look at the grand pyramid of India and how our workforce is really built, okay, which are properly equipped to have committees that are joining remotely, to have parties that are joining remotely. So I wouldn't want to only talk about the IT, ITES, white collar space. I also would want everyone to think about the blue collar space. Okay, I would want people to think about domestic workers. So, there are so many things where sexual harassment at the workplace is very cogent, but online places are not. So the first thing, and the Patna High Court had mentioned this in one proceeding, these proceedings need to be voluntary. Okay, you need to have consent of the participating parties, that they are all right and comfortable in participating in online proceedings. You can even check if there's an objection, whether there's any sort of reasonable objection that's been expressed by an opposing party. Okay, the audio and visual quality, the Bombay High Court commented on this, that the audio and visual quality of online proceedings needs to be proper. Okay, so there's no bar, but you need to have these checks in place. Another very important aspect that people miss out is the quorum that needs to be maintained. Okay, and not only a quorum being maintained, but a record of the quorum being maintained. So the Madras High Court had, dealt with this, that there was a case, and this is not this is in fact 2016, all right, but the chairperson did the proceedings alone, by visiting alone. Okay, and there was no evidence that the other members were participating in this. Okay, certain special cases we have even seen the committees ask the permission of the employer. Okay, Madhya Pradesh High Court had commented on this. The gender sensitization and ICC, the GSICC, which went into Shambhu's, the Shambhu judgment, okay, they very clearly in the minutes of meeting asked the employer for permission that we are going to be proceeding through video conferencing. Now, I don't say that every IC needs permission. It is much better to actually create a policy that recognizes online hearings, makes it a standard progress. This is something that you can actually put in your policy. Then you won't have any discrimination, any stances that are differential. Okay, and also, of course, one fundamental thing: if you're making proceedings virtual, recognize that your complaints may also come through virtual means. Okay, so you need to recognize the WhatsApp messages as complaints. All right, the posts that go on Twitter also as complaints, because then everything needs to match up to what your company is creating.
Wow. So complaints on Twitter, on social media, that's a very interesting topic, and I'll save that question for later time. Rama, I'm coming to you because the most important question here is that how does IC ensure online proceedings are fair? And what are those steps that IC need to take prior, during, post proceedings? Can we record proceedings? And do we then have to scribe it? Okay, so it's a whole package question for you, Rama, that we are coming to.
Yeah, sorry, I lost connectivity in between. Smita, can you please repeat your question?
No worries. What the entire team here is wanting to know is online proceedings. How do we ensure we are running a fair online proceedings? Second, are there any steps that ICs have to take prior, during, and post these proceedings? Can we record these proceedings? Is it permissible? Second, is there a requirement to scribe those interviews, or can we just, if it gets challenged in High Court, produce those recordings? Is it good enough? So it's a whole loaded question for you.
Yeah. Fair trials have to be there irrespective of whether they are online or offline, I would say. And the way to ensure it is to see that we are all neutral as, IC members. This is something that I keep repeating to all ICs that I'm a part of, saying that you may have opinions about people who are going to appear before the committee, but keep them out of the room where we are having, doing these proceedings. So that's the thumb rule, I would say, to bring in that balance and to be neutral about it. Also, the role of the external member is very important. I have seen when I was part of the local committee, and when even cases that didn't fall within our jurisdiction used to come to us for advice, and I would see that while the IC is conducting the inquiry, they're doing it without the external member, and people used to feel threatened and people used to feel that it was biased. And so the role that the external member plays, I think, is very important. When online proceedings started, some of the precautions that I took, as an external member was that when the complaint comes to us and when there is a reply that we get, we have an internal meeting, to discuss about the case and to, bring the committee on the same page. A lot of times I found these discussions very useful because a lot of time the other committee members are not aware of the nitty-gritties of the proceedings. They feel overwhelmed because they don't understand the legal jargons. They have not really read the law, and they seek your assistance in understanding the nitty-gritties. And so to have an internal meeting to look at viewpoints coming from everyone, sometimes we go into the details of who will start the inquiry and what will you start it with, what will you start saying, and who will come with what questions. So sometimes, and of course, then we, once they feel a little comfortable, we look at the flow. It is quite essential to see that every committee members makes the complainant feel very comfortable coming before them. This is even more challenging when we're doing online inquiry, because I personally, kind of prefer to do an offline inquiry, because there's a real-time calibration that one is doing, with people who are appearing before the committee. With online inquiry, sometimes there is connectivity issue. The video may not be enabled. It may not be possible with the bandwidth that they have to enable the video. And hence it becomes, sometimes it becomes a challenge to really understand the person who's come before the committee. The other things about what is it that we can do when we're doing an online inquiry is, I ensure that the complaint is kind of signed and scanned and sent on email rather than just an email, because we don't want people saying my email was hacked, I didn't send this, somebody else used my email to send this. So we ensure that it is signed by the complainant and scanned, or even a photo taken and then sent to us. Similarly, with the respondent's reply, we follow the same thing. Do we record the inquiry? Yes, we do, with the permission of the parties appearing, telling them why we are doing it, so that we don't miss out on any details, because it's very difficult to listen to what they are saying, calibrate with them while we are online, and somebody typing it, and there can be details that are missed out. So the recording is there for us to go back. But with the recording, we transcribe the entire thing, so we don't miss out on anything that is said by the person who's appeared before the committee. Once we transcribe it, we send it to that person for confirmation. If they said that we've not said this, we go back to the recording, ensure that whatever is said is taken, make the corrections if required, or if the corrections are not required but the person doesn't remember that he or she said it, we share the video with them so that they know why we've written that in the transcription. And then we take their signatures for confirmation that this is what they said and this is their statement, so we can annex it to the report. The other thing is that transcription takes a lot of time. It's a very time-consuming process. So planning the inquiry, blocking the dates, because coordinating in the first few cases that we did online, coordinating time between the parties, between the committee members, with all the work going online and work from home situation, with no help at home, which was also a reality. So budgeting time for homework and as well as this kind of work was important. And so we learned a lesson from there, and we kind of tentatively block our calendars so that we are prioritizing inquiry over everything else. So we know that that time slot is given for an inquiry. Whether it happens or not happens, we can release that slot later, but we block the time so that we are able to finish the inquiry within the given period under the law. We keep a record of every communication, because in some cases, like I said, coordination itself was so difficult. Availability was getting everybody's availability was difficult. So there were some delays that had happened, but we have to give a reason if there is a delay and if we have crossed the 90 days. So keeping record of all communication, so that if there is some like if there's somebody who is in one of my inquiries, 3 members were corona positive, and it was very difficult for us to conduct the inquiry and complete the quorum. And so there were times when we had to cancel, when it was very difficult for a member to really join because of the health status, or sometimes it was somebody who was appearing before the committee who needed that time off because they were detected as positive. So we had to balance this out. We had to ensure, and all those communications were maintained, so that if we had to give that reason, we were able to support it with the communication that was made. The other thing is, I think, the tonality in which we communicate, especially during an online training, is very important. I have seen cases where people take an offense to something that you've said. So explaining yourself so that they don't feel offended, and they know enough that we are not judgmental about them, is very important. When you're actually doing it in real time, it's different, because like I said, calibration of physiology happens easily. In an online session, that doesn't happen so easily. The other thing is we check whether they have access to, not just online access to joining the inquiry online, but whether they have the privacy to sit and talk about what they've gone through. In one case, we realized that this girl was doing the inquiry from her house and her husband was prompting everything. And we realized that because we requested her to enable her video. Only when she enabled the video, we realized that he's not letting her talk what she wants to talk, and he's constantly interfering and constantly, trying to tell her to say something, passing on something. And we could see because her eye movement were going. And finally, we asked her, "Is there somebody in the room?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Can you ask them to step out of the room?" So even having that privacy, having a room where they can sit on their own and talk to the committee members without any kind of burden and without any kind of an apprehension or intimidation was very important. So sometimes we have asked people to open the office and to let them sit in the office and connect with the inquiry. And like Devika rightly said, there were some cases where they did not have access to online inquiries, and these are times, but it was that whole balance that we had to do of hearing the case so that that safe working place is created for them, and the challenge of having access for an online inquiry. I have also conducted inquiry over WhatsApp video call, because that lady just didn't have access to a Google platform or a Zoom platform, and she was in her village, and yet her case was important, and she was so scared that we said, okay, let's do an WhatsApp video call and conduct this inquiry. So we have to be innovative, we have to be proactive. At the end of it, what is important here is that are we prioritizing this to ensure that workplaces are safe. Sometimes, like I said, the time gap between things happening, between transcriptions happening, there were cases where we had to send certain material for forensic to forensic labs. People get anxious as to what is happening. And so keeping them updated as to what the IC is doing, that we are not just keeping quiet about it and the case is important to us, keeping them updated, giving them an idea about the next step that's going to happen, how do they need to be prepared for the next step. I think informing them and keeping them informed is very important. And at the end of it, after the inquiry is conducted, we do have a lot of internal meetings for discussions and analyzing the case, and every report that we send out is signed by the concerned party. If it's a conciliation, both the parties who have agreed to the settlement terms sign it. So even if it's a digital signature or a scan signature, we see that they have agreed to sign it, and so also all the committee members sign it.
So Rama, couple of questions that quickly come to my mind, right? Signatures, you said. So now in digital platform, how would you, or virtual platform, how would you take signatures? It would have been very easy to sign off if it is in face-to-face discussion, right? So how will you manage that situation?
Yeah, so we use the digital signatures, or there are scan signatures that we copy paste on the report. And for people who don't have that because they don't have access to the digital platform, there is somebody, like I said, there's somebody from the office that they're working who's part of the committee. One of them takes the responsibility to meet them in person and get the signatures on the hard copy. And people who are not meeting in person because we are at different locations, we give our signatures through either scanned signatures or digital signatures.
All right, so that is valid. Another question, and Devika, Roshni, you all can also pitch in. My main concern is whether of confidentiality. Okay, as you rightly said, privacy is not there. There are people around. What if the conversation is getting recorded? What if they have put their phone on a recording mode and the entire conversation? How do we ensure this confidentiality or sanctity of that entire procedure? Is there a way that you all take steps? Any innovative thoughts here?
It is difficult to monitor. So if they've joined using a computer or a laptop in the office and they do have their mobile phones on a recording mode, it is very difficult to ensure that they're not recording it. Having said that, at the beginning of the inquiry, we set a context to this entire thing, telling them the role and the responsibility of the IC, that they have the powers of the civil court, and that confidentiality will be maintained. We give them that assurance because not only the IC members have to maintain confidentiality, anybody appearing before the committee also has to maintain confidentiality. So we tell them that we don't discuss this with anyone unless it's really important to get certain document from certain department, get certain evidentiary material that has evidential importance from any department, and only then they will know why we want it. But otherwise, we ensure the parties appearing before this committee that confidentiality will be maintained, and that they also have a responsibility to maintain it.
Sure. Anything to add in this entire, because we took Rama took us through the entire process. So any tips for the people?
I just want to add on the recording bit, okay? And as Rama absolutely correctly put it, there is no way that we can 100% ensure that people don't record, but with proper counseling right in the beginning of the discussion, it can be ensured. Also, I have seen certain trends, and I'm saying this more as a cautionary tale. Certain trends where organizations put down in their policies, okay, that no manner of recordings will be allowed in the workplace. Otherwise, this may be a terminable offense. Now, there's a good side to it. The good side to it is that when you have proceedings such as this, you have a very firm policy that is already giving you the strength to say that, don't do this, this can be a terminable offense. The flip side is that if someone is facing sexual harassment and they would want to record a conversation where, say, a person is harassing them on the phone, okay, then these policies end up denting that. So what I always advise organizations is, for proceedings, have a separate policy, okay, and empower your ICs to be able to have these particular instruments, etc. And a policy really is to fill, I've seen a lot of organizations copy paste the law and make a policy out of it. That's not what a sexual harassment policy is for. A sexual harassment policy is to say what is important to your workplace and how you're going to end up adding to the law for your workplace, okay? Because the law is just the minimum threshold. All right. So I always tell organizations, please have a separate policy for proceedings with the IC. Don't think that that can apply to your employee relations.
I actually have a case law about whether recording an IC hearing is permissible or not. Actually, it's the Punita case, Sondi case versus Union of India. So over here, it was basically the complainant herself. She demanded that the IC hearing is recorded to maintain neutrality. And this is what the case, the Delhi High Court even held, that recording of the hearings of the IC in posh cases is permissible and can in fact be demanded by the complainant in such cases. And in this specific case, it went on appeal to the Delhi High Court. The IC hearings were not, the minutes of the IC hearings were not detailed. It was not recorded. There was no attendance register of the IC members who were attending the hearing. Nothing was recorded or maintained. So that's why the complainant went to the High Court stating that there was a power dynamic between her position in the company and the respondent's position. The respondent was a much senior person. So that's why she wondered why nothing was recorded, everything was hush. So she went, and Delhi High Court actually passed in her favor that it can be recorded if the complainant has a right to ask for it to be recorded as well.
So the complainant can ask for it to be recorded.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to extend this question. Yes, Devika has something to add.
Smita, I want to clarify that when the court was talking about recordings, it was not talking about electronic recordings. It was talking about a record of the proceedings.
Yeah.
Okay, so that record of the proceedings is maintained by ICs by, say, the minutes of meeting, the deposition that is taken down on oath. Okay, certain places, of course, like how like how Rama had said that, you may have an electronic recording, but the Punita Soji's judgment was not referring to electronic recordings or it being a matter of right that every proceeding will be electronically recorded. I just wanted to clarify that. They only refer to a record of the meeting actually having taken place for the members that attended.
All right. Yeah, I guess that is.
I just want to add to this point that the recording that we do, once it is confirmed and signed by the party whose statement we have taken, then we don't keep the recording. The recording is merely so that we don't miss out on any.
Did we lose Rama? I think what Rama is trying to say is that once the recording is done, we scribe it and then we kind of do not save it and keep. But the reason why I was asking a question on recording is, can tomorrow one of the parties, the complainant or respondent, demand for that recording? Okay. And then are we obliged to give it to them? Okay. So this was my question, Devika, Roshni, I think till the time. Rama, you're back.
Yes, I'm so sorry about my connection today. So I was saying that the recording is merely so that the IC does not miss on a point that anybody appearing before them has made. And once we have transcribed it and we get a confirmation and a signature on that document or that statement, deposition of a witness, whatever that is, then we don't maintain that recording. So it is not we don't attach that recording as part of annexures to the report. So it's the document ultimately that goes, the signed document that goes as an annexure to the report. So recording is only the safeguard. Like I said, it's difficult to multitask when you want to pay attention to what the person is saying and ask your further questions based on that. So the recording is merely a way to ensure that we haven't missed out on anything that is said.
Okay.
Smita, I want to just add something here. This can, while I understand that there are several things that an IC does that is internal to the IC's own deliberation. Okay, my concern would be that this can be tenuous ground. If you were to make a video recording, inform the parties that they are being video recorded, which is the usual course of action, and then after that you were to delete the video recording, I would wonder if, as a clever respondent, I would be able to say that the IC falsified records. Okay, so I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. Usually in our practice, we do not in any manner use video recordings as a tool, okay, because of all these questions that we are always concerned about. Because if there is a smart person who wants to come in and assail the IC proceedings, okay, they would say, we were informed that there was a video recording being done, okay, and now I want the video recordings to be provided to me. And there, if the IC were to revert back saying, no, those are only for our internal consumption and have been, say, not relied on, finished off, etc., we should be very careful around thorny things like this.
Yeah, is there a solution for this? I know we are on different grounds. So is there a solution where all three of us can agree, all four of us can agree that, okay, this is the best practice?
So I agree to what Devika is saying, but having said that, because of the confidentiality nature of the IC proceedings, nobody can really come and ask us for any kind of records. So it is only the party whom we are recording who may want to, while checking the document and before signing the document, may want to, go through certain part of the recording. But otherwise, somebody who's absolutely not related to the case cannot come and ask for anything related to case from the IC, whether there is a video recording or there is no recording and there is kind of, on the fly typing happening. Nobody can ask for those documents.
All right. Okay. So I think this is a great debate that's happening, and it will be really nice to hear from the audiences. I'm going to open up for audience questions. I already got one question from Ritu on the discussion that we are having. She's asking, as the virtual proceedings being done, what if the respondent does recording on his or her end and viral that proceedings or misuse that? I think we responded to this, but yeah, anybody wants to take it? Devika, Roshni, Rama.
Yeah, if the respondent goes viral with the proceeding that is happening, it is breach of confidentiality. And so setting the context that these proceedings are in camera or confidentiality has to be maintained in these cases is important. And definitely if it's a breach of confidentiality, an action has to be taken against such a respondent.
I'd like to add one more thing. In the POSH Act, Section 16 states the prohibition of publication or making known contents of complaint and inquiry proceedings. And Section 17 is the penalty for publication or making known such contents of the IC proceedings or the complaint or the recommendation. And the penalty over here, it's detailed that whoever contravenes with the provisions of Section 16, he or she shall be liable for penalty in accordance with the provisions of the service rules. And if the service rules are not provided or does not exist, then in such a manner as may be prescribed. So I think this is what contains all the, if a respondent, for example, records without taking permission.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate, and the reason why I feel I can and I am in a position to, because I was actually on the drafting committee of this law. So whatever we all know how it was, an exercise in compromise also by the time it came out in 2013. Okay, so if you read Section 16 and Section 17 carefully, yes, no doubt, Section 16 does say that contents of the complaint cannot be made public, etc., etc. It can't be published, communicated, made known to the public, press, or media. All of that is there. Okay, but when you come to Section 17, which is the penalty, okay, it is only on a person entrusted with the duty to handle or deal with the complaint, inquiry, or any recommendations. So in the question that is being asked, under Section 17, you cannot penalize the respondent. The respondent does not have the duty to handle the complaint. This duty is with IC members, LC members, the employer, etc. So organizations need to create in their policies, and that's why I always impress the importance of a policy. They need to create in their policies safeguards against such a situation where, it needs to be understood that any sort of dynamics, any sort of paperwork, any sort of recordings, any sort of things that are being shared with the respondent, etc., are basically looked on as confidential documents and property of the company. And it's the company policy that then say, under an IT policy or under a distribution of materials policy needs to cover that.
All right, that's quite an eye-opener, because I would say I used to think that penalty is a penalty for everybody. All right, that's a good point of view for us to look at. I have another question from Deepthi here. She's saying, is it required for IC to conduct MOMs at every regional, MOMs is minutes of the meeting, at every regional office, or can they just be one consolidated quarterly meetings at the head office? How are the compliance with quarterly meetings conducted during work from home scenarios where offices don't have physical offices? Offices don't have physical offices. Deepthi, you want to ask that question, because I think you were thinking something and you were typing something.
No, hi. My question was, now some of these branch offices are closed, but however, there are headcounts and there are, compliance checks that is required to be done. So can we just do one pan-India quarterly meeting for the sake of compliance, or should we do it at every district offices?
Who will pick this up? Devika, I see your hand going up.
Smita, I think I've spoken quite a bit, so I was actually waiting for Rama or Roshni to chime in, and please feel free to. Okay, but looking at the question, please understand that quarterly meetings is not a mandatory aspect under the Act. it is part of a discretionary aspect or a practice that the Ministry of Women and Child Development is encouraging. Okay, there are, and all government offices, of course, need to do it. Private organizations have been encouraged to do it. So first, of course, is it required for the IC to conduct MOMs at every regional office? Is there any penalty that will happen if you don't do it? No, there isn't any penalty. But is it a good practice? Because a lot of things are not about compliance or the checklist. Okay, as a good practice, if your ICs are meeting regularly, then there is a visibility created around those ICs, created around those proceedings. It gives employees a lot of comfort to know that they have a functioning IC there. Okay, so I would actually want you to think of it more as a good practice, particularly when all of us are working in silos. Okay, think of, you know, having the something around awareness initiatives around this, that the internal committee met on such day. They checked these things for the office. Okay, and have an emailer sent out to the employees around that. That really creates a lot of stimuli and awareness around, you know, how seriously the company takes its responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely, Devika. I think we should use this quarterly review meeting as learning. We should use this quarterly review meeting as gathering information. We should use this for creating prevention and prohibition activities. There are so many things that it's not a check in the box activity just because we've got a stick and we have to follow it, but use it like something, you know, you have got a playground and you can build a castle. Basically,
Yeah.
that's what I think. Yes.
I think it's a good practice that even if there aren't any sexual harassment cases, quarterly meetings should take place to create awareness amongst the IC members.
Absolutely.
And other employees.
Absolutely. I think, yes, I think we've answered the next question, that how frequently IC members should interact. According to me, I think at least quarterly, if you're a set of 5 people. If you're larger, maybe you can do monthly meeting. I mean, is there a rule book to it? There's no rule book, right? It is how you come together and brainstorm and work towards creating safe workplaces. That's, I think, what it is. We have another question. Oh, I have 3 questions. Anita, you've loaded it. Okay. You've taken my role. Is there a section under the law which says that the transcription of recording needs to be signed by the respondent and complainant? Okay, this is a very legal question.
This is your direct question.
Yeah, there's nothing in the law that would say, but generally, I mean, if we say that we have the powers of the civil court and we are following the, proceedings like in a civil court, everything that is deposed before the court is recorded. And since we're doing it online, how do we ensure that they agree to what is said and we've recorded exactly the same thing? And it is again a safeguard that we get it signed from them so that they don't backtrack or they don't say that I never said this and you've put something that I never said. So this is also a kind of a safeguard to ensure that we've recorded and we've put it down on paper just as they said it. And we've not added a meaning to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Her second question is, do witness need to sign the transcription?
Yes.
Yes. Because otherwise they will say that you have created your own story and made it and kept it there. I didn't say this.
Yeah, that just brings in authenticity. Yeah, so anybody who deposits before the committee should sign it. That's a good practice. And it also safeguards the IC, I would say.
And also for evidence purposes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The protocol that we usually create is that whenever you have an IC meeting with any person, say you're speaking to the respondent, you're speaking to the aggrieved woman or any witness, all right, you take down the minutes of the meeting or a deposition of that person, particularly calling out that it's on oath, etc., because these are also certain safeguards that you need to ensure are there in the proceedings. And then to make it easy, all right, because we know there was a time when there was absolutely no way to get wet signatures. Okay, and as Rama said rightly, we had to be innovative and we learned as we went along. Okay, so to make it really easy, what you can do is, where emails are possible, copy and paste the entire deposition in the body of the email, send it on to the party to whom it concerns, okay, could be the witness, the aggrieved woman, or the respondent, and ask them to send an email response back confirming what has been taken down by the IC. And if they wish to make any sort of changes to it, all right, they can do so in a different color. Now, usually what ends up happening is if you've had detailed proceedings, you don't really have any changes come in. And if major changes come in, then you also need to consider it from the point of the conduct of the witness, particularly, now the witness or the respondent or the aggrieved woman is changing their stand. So majorly when not in the scrutiny of the IC. Okay, so this is something that we've been following as a practice.
Great. The third question, can the transcription be misused by complainant, respondent, or witnesses in any way when we are sending it over the email for digital signature? Aha.
Can a rule be broken? Always. Can the law be broken? Always. Yes, but with proper counseling, and again, I'll reiterate what Rama said. There are several safeguards that right in the beginning of the meetings, when you have these conversations, you instill on people. Policy is another way to be able to cement that. Okay, with those conversations and hopefully with a well-backed policy, you're able to take care of these situations. Still, if somebody wants to go and do it, then, it's a free world.
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot tie them by chains and say, this cannot be done. And you can't be monitoring what they're doing with the phone, with the laptop. It's very difficult. I think trust is important. Trust factor is important. Telling them that why are we doing what we are doing is important. Taking them through the entire process is important. Having transparency is important so that they know that we are doing it with the right mindset. So I think beyond that, you cannot control people. They can. Whoever wants to do can do things. Dr. Sandhya Advani is asking, transcript of statement needs to be signed by the party. Okay, she's answered that question. The transcription done by IC themselves. How do you do it? Is transcription done by IC members themselves? How do you do it? Yes. Dama is shaking her head.
Yes, and that is why I said budgeting time for the inquiry is so important. And I have spent about 5 to 6 hours just transcribing a half an hour conversation, believe me, because you go to and fro to ensure that every word is captured. Sometimes these people are talking in, they're talking in Hindi and English, or Hindi and Marathi, or whatever the regional language, and to capture each one of them and ensure that you've not missed out on anything. But for confidential reasons, we don't pass it on to anybody else, and we do it ourselves. So we take the responsibility. We say, okay, this deposition is going to be done by this person, and if it's too long, we kind of cut the recording and we share it and then create one document. So there are ways in which we do it, but yes, the IC members do it.
Yeah, and I remember 8-hour conversation, 4 IC members, 44 days.
So, but that's another side to it. I mean, 44 days, 90 days of the inquiry and 44 days in just one transcription is, difficult. So that's the whole balance that has to be done. Yeah.
What are the ways to raise a complaint when the organization has no active IC members or do not take it very seriously? Shweta is asking this question.
There's a Government of India initiative for online complaints. It's known as the She Box. So that is the ways complainant or victim can go and write down, and it's completely anonymous. Everything is the anonymity of the complainant is maintained, and your answer will be heard.
Sorry, I just wanted to extend this question that because these kind of harassments, when it happens in the workplace and the whole company has not got, not keen on, taking it forward. So how do you think that we will be able to produce any kind of proof or an evidence to the particular act, or how will the company and the law deal with it?
So the other way to do it is when they don't take up a complaint that has come, and they either because they don't have an IC or the IC is reluctant to take for whatever reasons, that means they're not following the mandate of the law. And if they're not following the mandate of the law, you have to inform it to the appropriate authority so that there can be a show cause notice issued in the name of the employer and they be made answerable for this thing. And then of course there's a penalty clause of about 50,000 for the first offense and up to 1 lakh for the second consecutive offense. So these are mechanisms that we definitely need to use when they're not following the mandate of the law.
Thank you.
So, of course, also understand that when you say no active IC members, okay, I'm sorry, Rama, are you speaking because you're on mute? No, you're actually not on mute, I'm not very sure. Okay. All right. So understand that there is a mandate, you know, even under the Companies Act and under the Company Accounts rules, okay, where a board of directors is supposed to give a declaration. It's part of their director responsibility statement that ICs have been constituted in the company in accordance with the law. So that's point number one. In fact, it extends the fines. Okay, the POSH Act fines may look very little to you, 50,000 and 1 lakh or so. Okay, but under the Companies Act, it extends the fines up to 3 lakhs. Okay, with a personal responsibility on all the directors. All right. So if you find that you are in a situation where your company is not taking your concern seriously, you have asked for information on the IC and it's not being provided to you, I would urge you that you inform your company that as a matter of right, if the company has no IC, you can proceed to the local committee. That itself, believe me, is sword enough, okay, for a company to immediately start paying attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Can case law be used as a reference, for example, to ask for termination or any other action on the accused during the IC proceedings? Who's asking for it? I mean, is IC asking? Shivani, you want to clarify that question, please? Can case law be used as a reference, for example, to ask for termination? Who's asking? I didn't understand. Okay. Nandita is saying, is transcription a summary of a party's statement during meeting or word to word noting of what party has said?
I think there's a lot of confusion which is being created in the group amongst transcription and maintaining a record, etc. So let me just clarify. When we are using the words transcription, okay, then that is a word to word transcribing of whatever a person has said. It is not necessarily a tool under the law that needs to be engaged everywhere. When we're talking about a record of the proceedings, then a record of the proceedings can be through minutes of meetings, it can be through depositions, and that can actually be more of a first-hand account of what is happening or whatever the party is saying. And that can also be a summary of the proceeding. Okay, so what is more important and critical is for you to gauge as a company, okay, or you to gauge as an IC. As Smita and Rama clearly said, that if you're thinking of transcriptions, you're spending days just in then transcribing, okay, and maybe you may have a velocity of cases. See, if you're having one case, say every 6 months, or say once a year, okay, I can understand that you can maintain this kind of process. But if you're a company that has 3-4 cases coming up in a month, transcribing is not advisable then, because it's not practical for your IC members to keep up. Then it's much better for you to maintain records of discussions through minutes of meetings, etc.
Okay. I think there are more questions coming up, but we are like at 8:20, and I think it's a good idea for us. Uma, I will take that question and I'll pass it on to the 3 panel members and ask them to maybe write it to you. In the meantime, any closing statement from Rama, Roshni, and Devika?
So this is, of course, turned into, you know, we always say that when we're looking at it, we become very technical around what we're doing. And I understand everyone has very technical questions. On the face of it, what we need to understand is that online proceedings can actually be very advantageous. Okay. And they have been a way by which we managed situations quite well. In fact, I must commend internal committees really, and members of internal committees. There was a point of time when courts did not know how to proceed. And I have seen ICs Okay, and even in certain districts, LCs being brave enough, bold enough, using technology and ensuring that justice is always delivered. And that's very important, because eventually you don't want to create that kind of gap or lacunae where a person feels they're all alone.
Lovely, lovely, Devika.
All right.
I would just add on to what Devika said and say that policy is not a cookie cutter, and it has to be written to the requirements of the organization and the business model that they follow, the challenges that they foresee. So there has to be a vision while the policy is made. And I think the more specific you are in developing your policy, it becomes a guiding line for the IC to follow, whether it is an online proceeding or whether it is an offline proceeding. If we have everything written like an SOP in the policy for everything and we cover all grounds, I think that makes it easy.
Yeah, nail on the head. Roshni?
All right. I just wanted to say that so what I understood from the entire conversation was that the highlight of this is that workplace is not only limited to the four walls around us, physical workplaces. It is also inclusive of virtual spaces, because virtual form of sexual harassment can take place, and the POSH definitely has included this in their broad definition of workplace way before the pandemic. When 2013, the POSH Act came into force, that was when the inclusion of workplaces, wherever it is, whether at home or elsewhere, it is part of it. And section 2.0.
Thank you so much, Roshni. Thank you for, thank you all three of you. It was quite a power-packed conversation. I got to learn so many things. Doing this work from last 8 years as an external member, prior to that being part of, an organization and being an internal member. But I always at the end of the session think, wow, there are so many things that I still have to learn. I still have to know. And it just makes me very excited. Next month, what is it that I have to take up, right? So thank you very much for spending so much time with us. I'm sure a lot of people took away a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. And I understand that virtual proceedings, virtual workplaces, sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment in virtual
workplaces.
Sexual harassment. Sexual harassment in virtual workplaces will happen. Online proceedings is here to stay. How good and efficient our IC members is something that we'll have to look at. We should not be doing check in the box, but really working towards fair proceedings, and all hands on deck. I think with that, we'll close this conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Smita. Thank you, CalPHR and ILA team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Smita.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Smita. Thank you for the teams that organized this. Thank you.
Thank you.